Revenge with Marvella. I sat in the courtroom that Tuesday morning, hands folded in my lap, watching my daughter-in-law's attorney pace before the judge. Her voice was smooth, practiced, almost sympathetic as she explained why I shouldn't be trusted with my own affairs. Your Honor, Mrs. Patricia Coleman is experiencing significant mental decline. She's confused about dates, confused about finances, confused about what she signed and when. The word hung in the air like smoke. Confused. She said it 3 times in 2 minutes. My son Michael sat beside his wife, staring at the polished table. He wouldn't look at me. The judge, a thin woman with silver hair, glanced in my direction. Her expression wasn't unkind, but I saw the uncertainty there. I was 73 years old, sitting alone on my side of the courtroom. They had an attorney, documents, and a rehearsed narrative. I looked exactly like what they wanted me to be. A confused old woman who didn't understand what was happening to her. I let them think it. I'd been letting them think it for months. Their attorney continued building the case. She described me as fragile, forgetful, someone who couldn't remember conversations we'd had or decisions I'd supposedly made. Michael's wife, Jennifer, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The performance was convincing. I had to give her that much. Mrs. Coleman signed financial documents without understanding them, the attorney said. She's given conflicting accounts of her own assets. She becomes agitated when questioned about routine matters. My son finally glanced at me just for a second before looking away. I saw something in his face that might have been guilt, but it vanished too quickly to be sure. The court clerk, a young man with glasses, stood and approached my seat. "Ma'am, do you need assistance standing?" he asked quietly. His kindness was genuine, which somehow made it worse. "I'm fine, thank you," I replied. The judge made a note. Even simple courtesy was becoming evidence of my supposed frailty. Everything they'd planned was working exactly as they'd intended. I didn't argue. I didn't interrupt. I let their narrative unfold without resistance. My own attorney, a court-appointed public defender who'd met me twice, sat silently beside me. He'd suggested early on that I might want to consider their concerns and work toward a compromise. He didn't believe in my case. Nobody did. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Coleman, have you undergone any recent cognitive evaluations?" Her tone was careful, almost gentle. "I have, Your Honor," I said quietly. "And do you have documentation of these evaluations?" I nodded but didn't elaborate. Let them wonder. Let them assume those evaluations supported their story. Jennifer whispered something to her attorney, who smiled slightly. They thought they'd already won. They'd spent months building this narrative, carefully collecting every moment I'd forgotten a name or mixed up a date. They documented my finances better than I had, presented everything as evidence of declining capacity. What they didn't know was that I'd been documenting something else entirely. I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I overheard Jennifer on the phone, planning this exact strategy. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila folder. It was sealed with red tape, official-looking but unmarked. I didn't hand it to the judge. Instead, I turned to a man sitting in the back corner of the courtroom, someone I'd noticed when I first entered. He wore a dark suit, no insignia, but his posture gave him away. Military. Active or recently retired. I stood slowly, walked across the courtroom and handed him the folder. "For verification purposes," I said quietly. He took it without comment, broke the seal, and began reading. I watched his expression change in the span of 3 seconds. His eyebrows rose slightly. His jaw tightened. He read the first page twice, then looked up at me with an entirely different kind of attention. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cutting through the room's murmur. "I need to request a brief pause in these proceedings." The judge frowned. "And you are?" "Captain James Morrison, Military Legal Liaison. I'm here for unrelated verification, but something has just come to my attention that's directly relevant to this case." Captain Morrison held the folder open, his finger tracing the header of the first document. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't showing any emotion at all, actually, which somehow made his reaction more significant. He simply reread my name, then the title line beneath it. Then he read it again. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Jennifer leaned over to whisper urgently to her attorney, but the lawyer shushed her, watching the captain with growing unease. My son's face had gone pale. The judge set down her pen. "Captain Morrison, what exactly are you reading?" He looked up, first at her then at me. "Your Honor, I need to ask Mrs. Coleman a clarifying question before I explain." "Proceed." He turned to face me directly, his bearing formal now, respectful in a way that had nothing to do with my age. "Ma'am, for the record, can you confirm the dates of service listed in this document?" I met his eyes steadily. August 1972 through November 1995, with subsequent contractor service through 2003. "And your clearance level at time of discharge?" "Top secret SCI access maintained throughout." His slight nod was all the confirmation needed. The captain turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I need to request a more substantial pause in proceedings. What I'm looking at here changes the context of these competency claims considerably." The judge's frown deepened. "Captain Morrison, I appreciate military protocol, but this is a civilian court addressing a civilian matter." "I understand, Your Honor. However, Mrs. Coleman's service record and the security clearances she maintained are directly relevant to the claims being made about her mental capacity." Jennifer's attorney stood quickly. "Your Honor, we object. Whatever military service Mrs. Coleman may have had decades ago has no bearing on her current cognitive state." Captain Morrison's expression didn't change, but something in his stillness made the attorney stop talking. "With respect, counselor, when someone maintains top-level security clearance for over 30 years, including extensive psychological evaluations every 2 years, and additional cognitive assessments every 5 years post-retirement to maintain contractor status, those evaluations are extraordinarily relevant." The word confused suddenly felt very small in that courtroom. The judge looked at me with completely different eyes. "Mrs. Coleman, is this accurate?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said simply. Jennifer grabbed her attorney's arm, whispering frantically. Michael had gone from pale to gray. The judge studied the captain, then me, then the document still spread across Jennifer's attorney's table. Every instance where they'd used the word confused was now being mentally re-examined. "Your Honor," the captain continued, "military clearance evaluations are among the most rigorous cognitive assessments conducted anywhere. They test memory, decision-making capacity, resistance to manipulation, ability to handle complex information, and psychological stability. Mrs. Coleman passed these evaluations consistently for decades." "But that was years ago," Jennifer's attorney protested. The captain finally looked at her directly. "Her last contractor status cognitive evaluation was 18 months ago. She passed with distinction." The silence that followed was absolute. The judge set down her glasses. "Captain Morrison, I need to understand what capacity you're acting in here. Are you representing the military in this matter?" "No, Your Honor. I'm a liaison for legal verification on military-connected cases. I was here for an unrelated matter, but Mrs. Coleman's documentation falls under my purification authority." "Purification authority?" the judge asked. Captain Morrison nodded. "Verification of military records in civilian proceedings, particularly when those records relate to legal standing, competency, or character. It's a formal role, Your Honor. When I certify these documents, they carry official weight." Jennifer couldn't contain herself any longer. She stood up despite her attorney's restraining hand. "This is ridiculous. She can't even remember what day her granddaughter's birthday is. She called me Susan last week, and my name is Jennifer. She's confused all the time." The courtroom went very still. Captain Morrison turned to look at her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Ma'am, you've just made a direct contradiction to certified federal documentation in open court. I'd advise you to sit down and stop speaking." Jennifer's face flushed red. Her attorney pulled her back into her seat, looking panicked now. The judge leaned forward. "Captain Morrison, I think you need to explain exactly what you're certifying here." He nodded crisply. "I'd like to request that the court record be amended to include Mrs. Coleman's complete service record and post-service evaluations." The captain opened the folder wider, selecting several documents. "These are certified copies of psychological evaluations conducted by military psychiatric professionals. The most recent is dated 14 months ago. I can read the summary conclusions if the court wishes." Please do, the judge said. Her uncertainty had transformed into sharp attention. Subject demonstrates exceptional cognitive function across all measured domains. Memory, both short and long-term, tests in the 97th percentile for her age group. Decision-making capacity is rated as excellent. No indicators of cognitive decline, confusion, or diminished capacity. Evaluator recommends continued clearance status without restriction. He set that page down and picked up another. This is from 3 years ago. Similar conclusions. And this one from 6 years ago. Each document said essentially the same thing. I wasn't declining. I wasn't confused. I was, according to multiple federal evaluations, exceptionally sharp. Jennifer made a sound, something between a gasp and a protest. The captain held up one hand. Ma'am, I've already advised you once. I won't do so again. He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I formally request that the term confused be stricken from the record regarding Mrs. Coleman, unless opposing counsel can provide clinical documentation that contradicts federal psychiatric evaluations. The judge looked at Jennifer's attorney. Counselor, do you have any professional cognitive evaluations of Mrs. Coleman? The attorney shuffled through her papers. We have testimony from family members about her behavior, Your Honor. Documented instances of forgetfulness and confusion. But no clinical evaluations? We believed family testimony would be sufficient for these preliminary hearings. The judge's expression hardened. You brought competency claims without professional evaluation? Mrs. Coleman's behavior clearly indicated. What her behavior indicated, Captain Morrison interrupted, is that she was being observed by people looking for signs of decline. Confirmation bias is a documented phenomenon, Your Honor. Meanwhile, actual professionals with no vested interest found her completely competent. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Coleman, why didn't you present this documentation earlier? Because I wanted to see how far they'd go, I said quietly. And I needed their claims on record before I contradicted them. You anticipated this? I've anticipated it for 7 months, Your Honor. Since I first overheard my daughter-in-law telling someone on the phone that they needed to establish my incompetence before I changed my will. The courtroom erupted. The judge's gavel came down hard. When order was restored, the judge fixed me with an intense stare. Mrs. Coleman, you're telling this court you knew about these plans for months? Yes, Your Honor. And you prepared for this? Extensively. How extensively? I took a breath. I scheduled additional cognitive evaluations beyond what was required for my contractor status. I documented every interaction with my son and daughter-in-law. I kept detailed records of my own finances, medical appointments, and daily activities. I arranged for witnesses who could testify to my capacity, though I hoped I wouldn't need them. Why not present this information immediately? Because I needed them to fully commit to their false narrative, Your Honor. I needed every claim on record. I needed to see exactly what they were willing to say about me under oath. Captain Morrison nodded slightly, understanding the strategy. Michael finally found his voice. Mom, we were just worried about you. I looked at my son for the first time since the hearing began. You were worried about my money, Michael. Let's not confuse the two. The judge wrote something down, her pen moving rapidly across her notepad. Mrs. Coleman, the judge said. You mentioned arranging witnesses. Who were you prepared to call? My physicians, Your Honor. 3 different doctors who've treated me for various conditions over the past 5 years. My financial advisor, who can testify that I understand my assets completely and have made no unusual decisions. My neighbors who interact with me regularly. The director of the volunteer program where I work twice a week. And several people from my church, including the pastor. You volunteer? I coordinate the community meal program, Your Honor. It involves scheduling 40 volunteers, managing food donations, tracking dietary restrictions for approximately 200 regular attendees, and maintaining health code compliance. I've been doing it for 6 years. Jennifer's attorney looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. The judge continued. And your financial advisor can testify to your competence? She can testify that I've increased my investment portfolio by 18% over the past 3 years through careful planning, Your Honor. She can also testify that I recently declined a high-risk investment opportunity my son recommended, which subsequently lost 40% of its value. Michael's face went from gray to white. Jennifer stared straight ahead, frozen. The judge turned her attention to Jennifer and her attorney. "Counselor, I'm going to ask you directly. What evidence do you have that contradicts anything we've heard?" The attorney fumbled with her notes. "Your Honor, as I mentioned, we have extensive testimony from family members about Mrs. Coleman's confusion regarding dates, names, and financial matters. Give me a specific example. She consistently fails to remember her granddaughter's birthday." I spoke up quietly. "My granddaughter's birthday is March 15th, Your Honor. She'll be 9 years old. Her name is Sophie Margaret Coleman. She's allergic to strawberries, plays soccer, and wants to be a veterinarian." The silence was crushing. The attorney tried again. "She called my client by the wrong name recently." "I called her Susan once," I admitted. "That was deliberate. Susan is Jennifer's middle name, which she hates. I used it because she just suggested to my son that they should consider having me declared incompetent. She didn't realize I was standing in the hallway." Jennifer's face flushed deep red. "That's not, we never." "You did," I said calmly. "February 18th, approximately 3:15 in the afternoon in my kitchen. You thought I was napping." Captain Morrison cleared his throat. "Your Honor, if I may add some context here. The level of security clearance Mrs. Coleman maintained requires specific cognitive capabilities that directly contradict the claims being made." "Explain," the judge said. "Top secret SCI access requires the ability to compartmentalize complex information, maintain detailed operational security, remember and apply intricate protocols, resist interrogation and manipulation tactics, and make sound decisions under pressure. These aren't casual requirements, Your Honor. People lose clearance for far less than the confusion being alleged here." He paused, letting that sink in. If Mrs. Coleman were experiencing the level of cognitive decline her family claims, she would have lost her clearance decades ago. The fact that she maintained it through 2003, and passed additional evaluations as recently as last year, makes these claims not just unsupported but actively implausible. "But she's older now," Jennifer's attorney tried weakly. "She's 73, Captain Morrison said. "The average age of federal judges is 68. The average age of senators is 64. Are we suggesting that age alone indicates incompetence?" The courtroom was completely silent. No one had an answer for that. The judge set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Coleman, I need to ask you something. Not about your condition but about your intentions. What are you hoping to achieve here?" It was a fair question. "I want my legal autonomy protected, Your Honor. I want the record to clearly state that I'm of sound mind and capable of managing my own affairs. And I want it documented that these claims were made falsely." "Why is documentation so important to you?" "Because this won't be their last attempt," I said simply. "If I don't establish the truth now, clearly and officially, they'll try again. They'll wait a year, maybe 2, and they'll be back with the same claims. I need this stopped permanently." The judge nodded slowly. "Captain Morrison, what is your role now that this information has been presented?" "I'm here to verify the authenticity of these military records, Your Honor. Once verified, they become part of the official court record. They can't be disputed without substantial contradictory evidence from equally qualified sources." "And have you verified them?" "I have. These documents are authentic, properly dated, and legally binding as character and capacity evidence." He closed the folder. "Mrs. Coleman's competence is not in question." The judge turned back to Jennifer's attorney. "Counselor, do you have any documentation that contradicts certified federal evaluations?" The attorney looked desperately at her notes. "We have a timeline of concerning behaviors, Your Honor." "Present it." She began reading dates and incidents. On January 10th, Mrs. Coleman forgot about a scheduled lunch with her son. On January 23rd, she claimed not to remember a conversation about selling her house. On February 2nd, "Your Honor," I interrupted gently, "may I respond to these?" The judge nodded. January 10th, I didn't forget the lunch. Michael changed the time without telling me, and then claimed I'd agreed to the new time. I have the original text message exchange. January 23rd, I remember the conversation about selling my house perfectly. I said no. They're claiming I don't remember because I didn't agree. February 2nd. I paused. Actually, I don't know what they're claiming happened on February 2nd. I was in Baltimore that entire week at a military reunion. The attorney's face fell. She checked her papers and I saw the moment she realized her timeline was wrong. Your Honor, we may need to request a recess to verify our documentation. The judge's expression had moved beyond skeptical into something harder. Motion for recess is granted. 15 minutes. I stood slowly gathering my things. Captain Morrison approached me as people began filing out. That was well played, ma'am. Thank you, Captain. May I ask you something? Of course. How long did it take you to plan this? I considered. The moment I realized what they were doing about 7 months ago, I started keeping records. But the real planning started 4 months ago, when I contacted my former CO to ask about getting current evaluations. He connected me with the right people. And you knew I'd be here today? I knew a liaison would be here for a different case. I researched the schedule. I took a chance that whoever came would understand what they were looking at. He smiled slightly. It was a calculated risk. I spent 30 years calculating risks, Captain. I'm good at it. In the hallway, Michael caught my arm. Mom, please. Let's talk about this. I looked at his hand on my arm until he released me. We're past talking, Michael. She's sorry. We both are. We're worried about you being alone, making decisions without help. You're worried about your inheritance, I said quietly. Let's not pretend this is about my welfare. That's not fair. Isn't it? When did you last visit me without asking about my will? When did Jennifer last call me without steering the conversation toward my finances? He had no answer. We stood there, my son and I, with 37 years between us and a gulf neither of us knew how to cross. I raised you better than this, I said finally. I know, he whispered. Then act like it. I walked away back toward the courtroom. Jennifer stood near the entrance, her attorney beside her. They were arguing in heated whispers. When we returned to the courtroom, the judge's expression was grave. Counselor, do you wish to proceed with your claims? The attorney stood slowly. Your Honor, in light of the documentation presented, we would like to withdraw several of our specific claims regarding Mrs. Coleman's cognitive capacity. Several. We maintain that there are concerns about her ability to manage complex financial matters independently. Captain Morrison stood. Your Honor, I have Mrs. Coleman's financial records here, provided with her permission. Would the court like to review them? The judge held out her hand. She reviewed my financial documents for several minutes, her expression inscrutable. Finally, she looked up. These records show consistent, conservative financial management. Investment decisions are well documented and reasonable. There are no unusual transactions, no signs of exploitation or poor judgment. She set the papers down. Counselor, I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you have any credible evidence that Mrs. Coleman lacks the capacity to manage her own affairs? We have concerns, Your Honor. Concerns are not evidence. Do you have evidence? The attorney looked at Jennifer, who shook her head slightly. No, Your Honor. We do not have evidence that contradicts the military evaluations. Then I'm making a formal finding for the record. The judge's voice was sharp, official. Based on the evidence presented, including extensive military psychological evaluations, cognitive assessments, and demonstrated capacity for complex decision-making, this court finds Patricia Coleman to be of sound mind and fully competent to manage her own affairs. The term confused is stricken from all references to Mrs. Coleman in this proceeding. All claims regarding her cognitive decline are dismissed. She paused, her gaze moving between Jennifer and Michael. Furthermore, I want it noted that these claims appear to have been made without proper foundation or professional evaluation. The judge wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice taking on a harder edge. I need to understand something. Why were these claims brought before this court without any professional cognitive evaluation? Why was a woman's competence question based solely on family anecdotes? Jennifer's attorney stood slowly. Your Honor, we believed in good faith that Mrs. Coleman was experiencing decline. Good faith. The judge's eyebrows rose. Good faith would have involved getting her evaluated by a professional before dragging her into court. Good faith would have meant consulting with her doctors. Good faith would not have involved claims this serious based on your client forgetting a lunch date. She turned to Jennifer directly. Mrs. Jennifer Coleman, you told this court under oath that your mother-in-law was confused and declining. You presented what your attorney called extensive evidence. That evidence has been shown to be, at best, misinterpretations and, at worst, deliberately false. Do you have anything to say? Jennifer's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Her attorney tried to intervene. Your Honor, my client. I asked Mrs. Jennifer Coleman a direct question. Jennifer finally found her voice. We thought it was true. You thought it was true, the judge repeated, her tone making it clear what she thought of that answer. Captain Morrison stood. Your Honor, if I may submit one final clarification for the record. Proceed, Captain. He pulled a single page from the folder. This is a summary statement from the Department of Defense regarding Mrs. Coleman's service record and post-service status. It's a formal document that can be submitted as certified evidence in legal proceedings. What does it say? It states that Patricia Coleman maintained exceptional service standards throughout her military career, received commendations for reliability and sound judgment, and has continued to demonstrate competence in all subsequent evaluations. It further states that any claims of cognitive decline would be inconsistent with her documented record and would require extraordinary evidence to support. He set the paper on the judge's bench. This document carries federal evidentiary weight, Your Honor. Once it's in the court record, it cannot be challenged without substantial professional evidence from qualified federal evaluators. It essentially creates a permanent legal record of Mrs. Coleman's competence. The judge read the document carefully. And you're submitting this officially? I am, Your Honor. It's within my authority as liaison to do so. Jennifer's face had gone pale. Michael stared at his hands. The judge added Captain Morrison's document to the court record, then looked at everyone present. I'm going to make my ruling clear and comprehensive. Mrs. Patricia Coleman is found to be completely competent to manage her own affairs. She has full legal capacity to make financial, medical, and personal decisions. No guardianship or conservatorship is warranted or appropriate. She continued, furthermore, any future attempts to question Mrs. Coleman's competency will be viewed in light of this proceeding. The court will expect substantial professional evidence, not family observations. The burden of proof in any future proceedings will be significantly higher. Your Honor, Jennifer's attorney began, I'm not finished. I'm also ordering that Mrs. Coleman's legal costs for this proceeding be paid by the petitioners. You brought serious claims without proper foundation. There are consequences for that. Michael flinched. Jennifer closed her eyes. Finally, I'm going to suggest strongly that this family seek mediation before any of you return to my courtroom. Whatever the underlying issues are here, they're not legal matters. They're personal ones, and you need to resolve them outside the legal system. She brought her gavel down. Mrs. Coleman's competency is affirmed. Case dismissed. The courtroom slowly emptied. Jennifer avoided everyone's eyes, walking quickly toward the exit with her attorney trailing behind. Michael hesitated near the door, looking back at me, but he didn't approach. Captain Morrison gathered his documents. Ma'am, you handled yourself well. Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your intervention. It was my duty. And frankly, watching someone try to claim you were incompetent after reading your service record. He shook his head. That took some nerve. They believed what they wanted to believe, I said. People often do. The court clerk approached me, the same young man who'd offered me assistance earlier. His demeanor was completely different now. Mrs. Coleman, I apologize if I seemed patronizing earlier. You were being kind, I said gently. There's nothing to apologize for. Still, I shouldn't have assumed. You saw what they wanted you to see. That was the point. The court reporter stopped me as I gathered my things. That was remarkable, she said quietly. I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like that. I hope you never see it again, I told her. No one should have to defend their competence against their own family. I left the courthouse by the front entrance, no longer worried about cameras or avoiding anyone. My legal authority was affirmed, protected, and documented in ways that would be nearly impossible to challenge. The federal documentation Captain Morrison had submitted created a permanent record. Anyone questioning my competence in the future would face that evidence immediately. It was over. My phone buzzed. A text from my financial advisor. Heard about the court decision. Well done. Want to meet next week to review the trust structure? I smiled. Yes, we'd review the trust. I'd make sure everything was ironclad. Every decision documented. Every legal protection in place. Not because I was confused or declining, but because I was exactly the opposite. I was clear-headed enough to know that family could be your greatest weakness if you let them be. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing in the crisp air. Behind me, the building held all the official record of what had happened. The claims, the refutations, the evidence, and the judgment. My competence wasn't just affirmed. It was documented in federal and state records. Permanent. Protected. Untouchable. The silence that followed me was profound. Not empty but powerful. The kind of silence that comes after a verdict. I walked to my car slowly. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel every moment of what had just happened. 7 months of preparation, of letting them think I was weak, of documenting every condescending comment and false claim. 7 months of playing the role they'd assigned me while building an unassailable case. They called me confused. They'd painted me as a fragile old woman who couldn't remember birthdays or manage money. They'd stood in open court and suggested I was losing my mind, that I needed someone else to make my decisions. The military record had called me competent. Exceptional, actually. Cleared for secrets, trusted with critical information, evaluated and re-evaluated and found sound every single time. The court had listened, not to the rehearsed story about a declining old woman, but to the documented truth about a woman who'd served her country with distinction and never stopped being sharp. I got in my car and sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel. My phone buzzed again, my neighbor checking if I was okay. I was more than okay. I was exactly what I'd always been. Clear-minded, capable, and completely in control. They called me confused. They were wrong. And now everyone knew it.